Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a recent reads video. And today I'm going to be talking about all the nonfiction that I've read so far in September. So we've got 5 different books to talk about. They cover a wide range of topics. I've been reading a ton of really good nonfiction, so let's get to it. The first book that I finished in September was What You Were Getting Wrong About Appalachia, and that is by Elizabeth Catte. I listened to this on audiobook from Scribd, and this book was basically written as a rebuttal to the book Hillbilly Elegy, which I did read several years ago. And this book basically pushes back against the idea that the people who live in Appalachia are a monolith, that they are, poor, white, conservative, and have been left out of American life. And that is why they all voted for Trump in 2016. And this book really, Elizabeth Catte really pushes back against that and explains how it's a much more diverse area than people think. It covers a wider geographical range than people think. She uses examples of community policies, art that's happening there, all different kinds of things to sort of give a better understanding of the diversity that does exist in this region, and how you can't just lump everybody together and paint them with one brush when it comes to any particular area of the United States and the political opinions and leanings and the problems that they face, or any of that. You can't just paint everybody with the same brush. So I thought it was a very valuable book in that way. I certainly feel like I learned a lot from reading it, and I'm glad that I read both Hillbilly Elegy and this book, because I think it really gave me a better understanding of the region and the issues that face that region today. The next book that I finished is a book that's been on my shelf for quite a while. This is The Wordy Shipmates by Sarah Vowell. I ended up listening to this one on audiobook as well. Sarah Vowell is a popular historian, and she writes a lot about U.S. history. And this particular book is all about the Puritans and why the Puritans came to America in the beginning, who the Puritans were, and how their beliefs and their way of doing things has informed how American culture and American politics works even today. I really did not understand the difference between the Puritans and the Pilgrims until I read this book. So considering that every year of my school career, from kindergarten through grade 8 at least, we spent the first month of the year talking about the Pilgrims, you would think I would have a very good understanding of the difference between the Puritans and the Pilgrims, but I did not. And so this book was invaluable just for that, better understanding of mine now. I will say that this book did drag in places. This book is filled with a lot of quotes from different important Puritans of the 1600s, and those people were very wordy and also really obscure sometimes in their way of writing about things. So I will just say that you may find pieces of this a little bit dry, which I did. And I will also say that the audiobook is a full cast. The author reads most of it, but then the quotes in the book are narrated by different other voice actors. And some of them are famous voice actors, like John Oliver narrates a bit of this. So, but I found it a little bit disjointed and jarring to hear different voices and to try to be remembering who was the narrator for which famous Puritan. So I don't know, that maybe reading this in the physical copy would work better actually than the audiobook. The next book I finished is one that I've been currently reading for about 4 or 5 years. So this is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And this is a, very well-known book of sociology, basically, of why humans think the way they do, why they make the decisions that they do, and the logical fallacies that we are all prone to. And it is super fascinating and interesting. I actually started working my way through this many years ago when Jeff and Rebecca at Book Riot did a separate podcast where they would read a chapter of this book and then discuss that chapter on a podcast. And I found that fascinating, and I was working my way through the book with them at that pace, and then they just abandoned the project. And then this book sat on my nightstand for years. And then I thought, this book is really helpful to me in my job, into understanding why people make the decisions that they do, or why people believe the way that they do. And so I went back to it and I started working my way through it. And I underlined and noted and tabbed and took notes. And I really did get a lot out of this. And this, Daniel Kahneman actually won the Nobel Prize in economics. But I think in terms of human nature and why people make the decisions that they do, this book is really, really great. And I learned a ton from this, and I would very much recommend it. If you're wondering why people make decisions that go against their best interests, if you're wondering why sometimes you jump to conclusions about certain things, this book has a lot of insights into that area. And so not only does he discuss his own research, but he gives examples and problems that you can work through yourself, and it's really worth your time. There's a reason why this is sort of a classic of nonfiction. The next book is a book that I've been talking about quite a bit recently, and it is probably my favorite nonfiction so far this year. This is How to Hide an Empire, A History of the Greater United States by Daniel Immerwahr. And this book, it goes into the colonial nature of America, even though Americans do not consider that we ever had colonies, or that we ever were imperialists, but that's not the case. The case is that ever since white Europeans came to North America, they have been engaged not only in this democracy experiment, they've also been engaged in taking over the lands of other peoples and using those lands for their own purposes, from taking the lands away from the Native Americans and using it to enrich themselves. This book then delves into the first examples of imperialism, when the United States basically claimed ownership of a bunch of islands that had guano on them because they needed fertilizer for agriculture, the agricultural revolution, basically. And then those guano islands became the basis for U.S. to expand its reach around the world. And really, this book goes into a lot about the Philippines, a lot about Puerto Rico, a lot about Hawaii, Alaska, and other island communities or island nations, I should say, that the United States, through one form or another, took control of, and called them territories rather than colonies, but it doesn't change the nature of the relationship. And the U.S. also was not really good at managing these territories, because it was so, the United States has been so, focused on making sure nobody thought they were actually creating colonies. They neglected to actually administer these territories very well. What was also fascinating was all the discussion around how after World War II, the United States was in a position to basically continue to be a huge colonialist power. And instead, the United States started divesting itself of territories and responsibilities. And that the technologies that were developed in World War II allowed the U.S. to be a global power without having to maintain control of a bunch of far-flung territories, the way that, for example, the British had to do with their empire. And the global nature of our economy and the technologies that were created in order to deal with the problems of World War II have allowed the United States to maintain its power around the world without having to, basically sit on a bunch of land. That's not to say we don't still have territories, and that we're not really still terrible at managing and administering and helping those people out in those territories, or even acknowledging that those people are Americans. We are absolutely incredibly terrible at that. And this book gives you all the information you need to know about how how America is an imperialist nation, and how we're doing it poorly, and how we really need to educate ourselves and be aware of what's happening in all of these far-flung places. This book is amazing. It's written so well. Daniel Immerwahr is an excellent author. He writes with a lot of he just has a very witty style of writing, which I love in my nonfiction. If you enjoyed the tone of, say, The Inconvenient Indian, this book has a very similar tone and style. So absolutely highly recommend. I think every American should read this book, because there is a ton of crap in here that I did not learn in school. All of these tabs, all of the yellow tabs, are facts that I was unaware of. So, and I took plenty of history classes, people. So the last book that I want to talk about, as far as nonfiction that I finished in the month of September so far, is a book called Hood Feminism by Mikki Kendall. And this is another excellent nonfiction book. I read this book on ebook from my library, and it's basically Mikki Kendall goes through point by point how white feminism has failed to support women of color, specifically Black women, in equality of, just in women's equality for women of color and Black women. That white feminists have been more focused on maintaining their own privilege and power than lifting up women from other racial backgrounds. And it was extremely powerful to read about. It was extremely enlightening. It really made me think about my own life in the context of the points that she was bringing up. I loved how she she explained how feminism isn't simply about, like the right to vote or equal pay for women with men. It's also about acknowledging that there's certain aspects of life that women have to deal with more so than men. And until we deal with those issues, women of color especially, will never be equal. So she talks about poverty. She talks about housing. She talks about rape culture. She talks about, I'm blanking on some of the other issues she talked about, but it's a wide-ranging discussion, and maybe goes far afield of what you think feminism really applies to. Housing is another one. Housing is, unless you have a safe place to live and you're not worried about becoming homeless, women of color don't have time to worry about or fight for the same things that people of privilege have time to fight for. And that's not to say that you might not, as a white person like myself, that I might not have experienced tough times, or I might not have problems in my life, but there are problems, then there are problems. And I have to acknowledge the things in my life that exist that give me a leg up over other people. And I have to acknowledge that in a way where I'm extending a helping hand to help people come up, right? Like, we can't just say, oh, everybody has the right to vote, feminism is solved, right? Like, the problems of feminism and women equality are solved. Like, clearly that is not the case. And I think Mikki Kendall very eloquently lays this out for us. And she is a person who has a lot of anger, and she's not afraid to show that anger. And I don't think women should be afraid to show that anger, because there's a lot of things happening in the world that we should be angry about, but we need to all work together to help improve the situations for everyone, and not just for people that look like us, whoever your us is. We all need to be focused on helping in every way that we can make things more equal across the board for everyone. And just because we may be in a place, or myself, I may personally be in a place where I feel pretty good about my my equality, quote unquote, that doesn't mean that I can be complacent and not recognize where equality doesn't exist. And so I need to, extend myself out. And if that means that I have to put myself in positions where maybe I feel uncomfortable or awkward, well, then I need to remember that too bad for me, because there's people that are in much worse positions than I am. And I think Mikki Kendall does a great job of explaining that and opening your eyes to conditions that exist around women of color and equality. So highly recommend Hood Feminism. I think it's another book that everybody should read. So those are 5 great pieces of nonfiction that I've read in the month of September. I hope that you've found some good nonfiction to read. Let me know in the comments down below some good nonfiction books that you've been reading lately. I'd love to hear about them, and I will talk to you later.